Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with David French of National Review, who is in for the vacationing Jim Garrity. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today, and we're happy to report that they are far less sober than we were yesterday. Very heavy stuff yesterday, more lighthearted today, but still significant things. David, let's start with the good martini. Sometimes Republicans do themselves some good by actually coming out with strong, conservative, free market principles, and sometimes they get help just because the Democrats blast themselves in the foot with a bazooka. And that's what happened yesterday with New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. He was at an event. The banner in the background was some event for women and girls. And so he decided to take a swipe at President Trump's 2016 campaign slogan of Make America Great Again. And it went somewhere that, other than him, I don't think anybody else was expecting. Keep in mind, this is a scripted speech.
And look, the simple point is all this comes down to this. We're not going to make America great again. It was never that great. We have not reached greatness. We will reach greatness when every American is fully engaged. We will reach greatness when discrimination and stereotyping against women, 51% of our population, is gone, and every woman's full potential is realized and unleashed, and every woman is making her full contribution. When that happens, this nation is going to be taken even higher, because we have not yet fully liberated the women in this country. And we will. And New York will lead the way, and watch New York rise.
Oh, so of course there was a PR disaster after that. Then the governor's spokeswoman, Danny Lever, says the governor believes America is great and that her full greatness will be fully realized when every man, woman, and child has full equality. Really? He believes America is great? Let's listen to this again.
We're not going to make America great again. It was never that great. We have not reached greatness.
The spokesperson went on to say that when the president speaks about making America great again, going back in time, he ignores the pain so many endured, and that we suffered from slavery, discrimination, segregation, sexism, and marginalized women's contribution. So, David, we can talk about all the reasons America is great, from our founding principles to our freedom to the fact that we've liberated continents on multiple occasions to people under oppression. We could talk about the bizarre fact that the Democrats still think women are horrifically oppressed in this country. Where do you go on this?
Well, one thing that's interesting to me is the crowd reaction. It seems like this combination of did he just say that, and I hate that he said that, with some people saying I like that he said that. Look, I have heard this line that America's not that great. America isn't great. America is a home of injustice and oppression. As long as I've been an adult. It was rampant when I was in law school. It was the first time I'd really heard it voiced loudly and proudly. And the way, I think a lot of this reflects the differences in conservative and liberals' views of human nature and history. So a conservative looks at history and looks at human nature and says, you know what? People are pretty bad. Nations around the world have been pretty bad. There's been an enormous amount of injustice in the world. But what happened in 1776 is we put together a set of principles and formed a nation around ideas that were truly good, and that we haven't obviously lived up to those ideals throughout our history. We don't live up to those ideals to this day in every way, shape, and form. However, what we created was something good and something that provided the intellectual and moral framework for us to get better. And that's a great thing that happened. And the end result is a nation that, when you look at it and you compare it to the rest of the world, is pretty darn great and has been pretty darn great. And I think that that's actually the proper way to look at the United States of America. When you compare it to the rest of the world, when you compare it to the arc, the conduct of nations throughout history, and when you look at the actual ideals upon which this nation was founded, there's a lot to love there. There really is. But I think a lot of people on the left say, look, there's no real impediment truly to creating a society that is far, far more just than the United States, that human beings are capable of creating such societies. And the fact that we are not as just as we would like to be, or the fact that America has suffered from some of the same sins that other nations have suffered from, that America is committed, should say not suffer. You don't suffer from sins, you commit sins, and that causes you to suffer. But the fact that America is not perfect, the fact that America has fallen short of its ideals, means that the pride that Americans have in their country is just severely misplaced. And if you look at human beings as far more perfectible than they are, as societies as far more perfectible than I think that they are, then I understand where these people are coming from. But I think that they're just fundamentally wrong in their starting presumptions. They're comparing the United States not to other nations often. They're comparing it to an unattainable ideal that it will always fall short of. They're comparing people not to other people, but to an unattainable ideal. And when that happens, I think that you begin to see sort of the reason why we have these fundamentally different views about this country, very different views about our history, how we should view our history. Cuomo, to the extent that, you said he offered a gift, I think that's right, because I think outside of the more extreme edges of the left, most Americans, left and right, or I should say liberal and conservative, understand that if you're looking at the United States compared to other nations, if you're looking at the ideals of the United States compared to the ideals of other nations, we've got an awful lot to be proud of.
No, that's exactly right. And I'm a little bit confused on where the bulk stand. I'm glad you said that last thing that you said there about where most people are probably on this issue. But given what you heard in law school and given what we hear from Cuomo about America not being great, I remember in the general election of 2016, both Hillary and President Obama were saying, why is this his slogan? America's already great. So where is the left really on this question, you think?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think it's monolithic. If you look at sort of what I would call the university left or the radical left, I think they're pretty firmly on the side of America's not only not great, that America's awful. If you're talking sort of like the Noam Chomsky left, the gender studies left, but yeah, sort of more broadly, the radical edges of the university left are very, very much in the United States is a broken society. It's been a broken society. It's a white supremacist society. So how can you look at all of that and say that America's great? But then there's another side of the left that I think is really proud of the country when they're in charge.
Right.
And what you have to remember is in 2016, Obama's saying that, Clinton's saying that, and they've been running, the executive branch for 8 years. Remember when Michelle Obama said, as Barack Obama was on his rocket ship ride to the top, for the first time in my life, I'm proud of my country. So, I think that what you see sometimes on part of the left is this really sort of contingent relationship to your view of whether or not America is great. It's great when it's doing what we want it to do. It's not when it's not doing what we want it to do. And let's be honest, there's some of that on the right as well. When you say make America great again, you're implying that it's not great right now, right? And I think that the better view, the better patriotic, appropriately patriotic view of America is that America is a fundamentally great country relative to the rest of the world. It is It has some deep-seated problems, as all human societies do, but it is still fundamentally a great country. And we can't be so obsessed with the ins and outs of who's in charge in Washington at any given moment that we call that into question. To call that into question requires some more fundamental change than changing out whether it's a Republican or Democrat in office.
David, we'll see what kind of impact this has. I'm sure there are already many, many ads being made for various races, maybe even in the New York governor's race.
Terrorist strikes again in London.
Putin's nuclear ambitions are raising proliferation questions.
There's a new military strategy in the South China Sea.
Global events happening now mean the demand for national security professionals will spike over the next decade. America's security will depend on individuals highly trained in strategy, disruption management, and decision-making. The Daniel Morgan Graduate School of National Security prepares students for a world full of instability. Students in our state-of-the-art school, just 3 blocks from the White House, take courses in counterterrorism, U.S. nuclear weapons, Russian politics, and statecraft. Our graduates are well prepared for sought-after security positions in government and private sectors. Even more unique are the multi-full-ride scholarships provided by donors investing in future leaders. For more information, go to dmgs.org/radio. For a career in organizations like Marriott and Boeing, the CIA, or FBI, and a possible full-ride scholarship, go immediately to dmgs.org/radio. That's dmgs.org/radio.
All right, let's move on to our bad martini now with a good silver lining here, and that's that Kevin Williamson is writing for National Review again. But here's his story. Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts has one-up socialist Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She proposes to nationalize every major business in the United States of America. If successful, it would constitute the largest seizure of private property in human history. He says Warren's proposal is dishonestly called the Accountable Capitalism Act. That, of course, shouldn't scare anyone. And this is what it says. Under Senator Warren's proposal, no business with more than $1 billion in revenue would be permitted to legally operate without permission from the federal government. The federal government would then dictate to these businesses the compositions of their boards, the details of internal corporate governance, compensation practices, personnel policies, and much more. Naturally, their political activities would be restricted too. Senator Warren's proposal entails the wholesale expropriation of private enterprise in the United States and nothing less. It is unconstitutional, unethical, immoral, irresponsible, and, not to put a too fine a point on it, utterly bonkers. And so he points out that she knows it's probably never going to happen, but it just shows how far these people are flinging themselves to the liberal fringe of the party to try and get a leg up in 2020, David.
Yeah, this law is really something else when you look at it. So, for example, she talks about a public benefit corporation and defines a public benefit corporation. These are large corporations that would essentially be subject to entirely new standards of governance. That a public benefit corporation must have a, quote, material positive impact on society. What is a material positive impact on society? That's left undefined. But if I get a coalition of shareholders, I can sue in federal court to get a judge to essentially take over control of the corporation or order it to engage in activity that advances this materially positive impact. I mean, what does that even mean? It's like passing a federal law that says corporations must do the right thing. And if they're not doing the right thing, shareholders can sue and make sure it does the right thing. I mean, that makes no sense. One of the cardinal rules of constitutional interpretation of statute, or one of the cardinal rules of constitutional regulation of Congress's statutory authority, is that a law must be susceptible to a reasonable understanding by a reasonable person. In other words, if my conduct is going to be regulated, I have to understand that regulation. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like, how do I know what to do if I can't understand what to do? And that's called the void for vagueness doctrine. If a law is so vague that a person of reasonable and ordinary intelligence can't understand it. Well, if I'm a CEO and I'm running a multinational corporation, what on earth does material public benefit mean? If I close a plant in Illinois to open a plant in Tennessee, is that a material public benefit? If I feel like my corporation will face long-term financial difficulties unless I relocate a plant from Indiana into, say, Ethiopia, well, is that a material? I mean, there's just no way to really figure this out. corporate law has evolved over a long time to help people understand what shareholder interests are, for example. But it has not evolved to say what is a material public benefit. What that really sounds like, if you've got your antenna up, is whatever federal regulators say it is. And that's what we're talking about when we say government takeover. And that is dangerous. That is trying to create, in essence, from the very top down, a command economy. And you're right. I don't think it'll ever happen. But it's easy to see how we could be in a situation where we would be in danger of something like it happening. I can easily imagine a situation where Trump is so vulnerable that Republicans are swept out. You get in a far left group of Democrats who then start to convince themselves that it wasn't about Trump. My election isn't about Trump. It's that America's in love with my progressive ideas, and they feel emboldened and begin to pass a bundle of bad laws. I think that that's a very real possibility down the line.
Yeah, I see a couple potential ramifications of this. One, everybody on the left is driving themselves so far to the left to appease the base that by the time they get the nomination, there's going to just be an avalanche of material against them that any reasonable person heading to the polls who's not a diehard lefty is going to find repulsive. But the more they keep leapfrogging each other to the left, if they ever do get back in power, like you were saying, something that's horrible but not quite that horrible will seem more reasonable. And that's not good either.
Well, let me raise the scenario I'm really concerned about. What I'm really concerned about is you have a 2018 that goes badly for Republicans, with essentially the Democrats saying, vote for us to repudiate Trump. And then GOP saying, no, look at how radical the Democrats are. Vote for us to save the country from their radicalism. If the Democrats win, immediately they will pivot from their own campaign message, which was vote for us to repudiate Trump, to, oh, you just ratified our agenda. Mm-hmm. And if you have say a Kamala Harris who wins in 2020, very possible. I mean, who knows? I mean, who can predict? But to say that it's somehow guaranteed that Trump wins re-election, I think is just, nobody can really know that. But if you have a Kamala Harris who wins in 2020 or an Elizabeth Warren who wins in 2020, here's what really concerns me. What really concerns me is that the energy on the left for social justice, the energy on the left for these far left ideas, how long will the filibuster last in the face of that energy? That's what I'm worried about. How long will the filibuster last? And if the legislative filibuster ends in the same way that the judicial filibuster ends, then watch out.
Speaking of 2020 presidential candidates, David, let's move to our crazy martini now. And I know we've got a very intelligent audience. We appreciate that. But raise your hand out there in podcast land if you know who California Congressman Eric Swalwell is. Now, some of you do. He's on cable news quite a bit, and we've talked about him a couple times here. But guess what? He's thinking about running for president. Washington Free Beacon. California Representative Eric Swalwell would not rule out a presidential run in 2020. A report from Politico noted Swalwell had been asked about several trips he'd made to Iowa in recent weeks. Quote, I'm laying the groundwork right now to win 3 congressional seats in Iowa. I'm going to make that decision, meaning whether to run in 2020, after the midterms. He says his wife is about to give birth later this year, and so any decision will come after that. And, of course, he would most likely be reelected to his very blue House seat out there in the Oakland area. So at age 37, he'd be one of the younger entrants in the field. Bookmakers in Vegas currently aren't even running odds on Swalwell, but 2 other Republican candidates are listed. One you mentioned, Kamala Harris, as well as the likely next governor of California, Gavin Newsom. So, David, I read this. Jim and I have talked about Michael Avenatti dipping his toe into Iowa and now New Hampshire. And basically, all you have to do is hate Trump to be considered a 2020 presidential candidate on the left.
Well, okay, we got to back up a minute and realize that if I just pile on this guy, I might be the most hypocritical person on the planet Earth.
You weren't looking for it, though. You were recruited. That's different.
But I considered it. I mean, you talk about a nobody thinking about taking on the Republican and Democratic nominees. Holy smokes. Yeah. So, I would say that the rise of celebrity Donald Trump has really paved the way for the rise of, celebrities like, or recent celebrities like Avenatti to think they could do this. So, Trump's celebrity has given a whole bunch of other celebrities some thoughts. Is it possible that my little balloon floating in 2016 has given all the nobodies around the world hope that they can run too? I don't know. So I would just like to publicly apologize to America if what we now face are, instead of 16-person presidential fields, we have like 200-person presidential fields where the debates take place in high school gymnasiums with the stands for the candidates. I don't know. I mean, look, all of these people floating their little trial balloons, it's a symbol of two things. One, it's a symbol of how the improbable rise of Donald Trump sent messages to an awful lot of ambitious people that, hey, anything's possible. But it also shows to the extent to which the Democrats still believe Donald Trump is more of an opportunity than a threat. In other words, he's so vulnerable that maybe even I could win, is sort of the mindset on the left. I don't think they're still quite serious about the notion that Trump is president and it could be a two-term president. I think an awful lot of them have said, and look, I still think Trump probably would have lost to anyone not named Hillary Clinton. I'm not sure about that, but I think an awful lot of Democrats are pretty darn sure about that. And so they think that the real presidential election will be the Democratic primary, and whoever comes out of the primary not named Hillary Clinton without Hillary's baggage is just going to win the thing. And I think that's really flawed thinking. It's going to lead to a too large field for the Democrats, and then they're going to face the problem that Republicans had in 2016, which is when the field is so large, it is very hard to coalesce. And you can have celebrity candidates come through. You can have attention-grabbing candidates come through who may not necessarily reflect what the party ideally wants to put forward. So they may find that their cockiness about 2020 is going to lead them down a dangerous path.
David, great to be with you as always. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
David French of National Review in for Jim Garrity today. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and be sure to tune in again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.